Hey everybody, my name is Anthony Aniano. I am a general class ham radio operator. I'm here to show you how to use your prep store radio today. It's a complicated subject, but we're going to take it in little pieces and we're going to simplify it. Just give you the basics today so you can operate this with your friends and family, and anybody who has this type of radio, you'll be able to communicate with them. Okay. So I guess we'll just do a very basic overview of what radio is, and I promise I'm not going to make this a science class. We'll make this very simple, but it'll help you to understand some of the concepts later on when we're talking about them. So a radio is a technology of using radio waves to carry information, such as sound, by modulating properties of electromagnetic energy. And those are waves transmitted through space, and they have amplitude, frequency, phase, and pulse width. Okay? A lot of terminology, you don't need to know all that. The key here is that it's an electromagnetic wave. The way it works is when you talk into the transducer, which is the little part of the radio here, it turns it into an electronic signal. Electronic signal gets shot out into the atmosphere, comes back into the ear, transducer reverses the process, and you hear audio. Very, very simple way of doing that, but we'll leave it at that. Two words you should know because you're going to hear them a lot: frequency and wavelength. You're going to hear frequency more than anything. The radio frequency is measured in hertz. Hertz is the measurement unit. So like a foot or a mile or a second, hertz is a measurement of frequency. 1 hertz is 1 cycle per second. Cycle is like a wave. So when the wave goes to the top and the wave goes to the bottom, that's 1 cycle. And 1 hertz is 1 cycle per second. So in the radio world, in the amateur radio world, we basically have 3 types of frequency groups that you're going to hear about and that people are using: high frequency, very high frequency, and ultra high frequency. These radios operate on very high frequency and ultra high frequency. High frequency is the guy in his ham radio shack who's doing Morse code and he's talking around the world. That's high frequency. You do need a general class, at least a general class license for that. Maybe technician, you could do some high frequency stuff, but for our purposes here, we're just going to focus on VHF and UHF. Hey, wait a minute, I heard that before my television set. Yeah, same thing. It's in those same frequency ranges, the television transmissions of the old days. That's why you had the big antennas on top of your house. We'll talk about antennas a little bit later. It's the same theory. So, very quickly, and then we'll get past the science part, there's amplitude modulation and frequency modulation. AM and FM, just like your AM and FM radio. The amplitude modulation, you can see, that sends information by changing the size of the wave, the amplitude. The frequency just changes how quickly the wave, so it's almost like an accordion, how quickly the wave comes through. It kind of compresses, but it's always at the same amplitude. Okay, so just to kind of rehash, we're operating on VHF and UHF. Very high frequency channels are also called 2 meters because the wavelength is generally 2 meters in length. You'll hear that sort of interchangeably. People will say VHF, people will say 2 meters. It's good that you kind of understand that those are the two of the same thing. Ultra high frequency is 70 centimeters. And you're going to hear that kind of intersposed together. So again, just if you can remember, UHF 70, VHF is 2 meters. All right, let's talk about the radio services which are available to us without a license from the Federal Communications Commission. You can't just get out there willy-nilly and broadcast radio without a license on many frequencies. But the FCC and the U.S. government have given us certain bands that we can use as citizens without a license and without having to have a call sign and that other stuff. And we're going to go through all these step by step. But as a quick rundown, there are FRS, which is the Family Radio Service. There's GMRS, which is the General Mobile Radio Service. MERS, which is the Multi-Use Radio Service. And I'm sure you've heard of CB, which is the Citizens Band. CB radio, come in good buddy, 10 breaker, 4, okay. These radios do not work on CB. That is a whole different, requires a different type of radio and a different type of antenna setup. So you're not going to get CB on this. But CB is also in that personal radio services space and it is free to use. Okay, let's talk about FRS, family radio service. Best way to think of FRS is these are the walkie-talkies that kids use. That's why I put up that cute little picture there. FRS allows two-way voice communications over short distances, generally less than half of a mile. That's because they're only operating on usually, I think, half a watt of power, very little power. They tend to be crowded because, hey, everybody's got these silly walkie-talkies, right? So think of an emergency situation, everybody's going to run out and dust off the old walkie-talkies that the kids have in their bedroom. We'll think about that a little bit more later. Just to confuse you a little bit, we'll get into it. FRS channels 1 through 7 can communicate with the GMRS channels, and they share some of those channels. I'll get into some of that talky stuff. We'll see what we talk about it. You don't have to memorize this, but here's a general list of what those frequencies are. Here are the specific frequencies. So they have a very specific number. We'll just look at the top one, 462.5625. It's like a telephone number. It's a very specific, and it's also, think of it like a radio frequency, 100.7 FM, you know, in your car. No different. You're just tuning to that frequency, and you're able to transmit and receive on that frequency. Okay. GMRS is that upgraded walkie-talkie that you'll see in the sporting goods stores or at Walmart. Costs a little bit extra. We call them the bubble pack transmitters. Now, technically, these do require a license from the FCC. Not everybody has them, not everybody uses them. They're $65, $70. They last for 5 years, and they apply to everybody in your family, even your grandparents, your kids, uncles, aunts, whatever. So if you think you're going to be using GMRS, not a bad idea. Go out and get the license just to stay in compliance. It does have 15 channels. What we like about GMRS over and above FRS, which we just talked about, is GMRS allows us on some channels to use repeaters. I wasn't sure if I was going to get into repeaters here, but basically a repeater is a big antenna and a radio that just relays between 2 points. It gives you a big distance to talk to, because now all of a sudden you've got a radio at 500 feet that can shoot down in another direction. So that gives you miles and miles of range versus not many miles of range if you were trying to do direct between two radios. And all the repeater does is it just broadcasts what you're transmitting to it to the other person. Everybody tunes into that repeater frequency, and you can hear each other speaking and so forth. All right. Let's talk about MRS, which is the multi-use radio service. MRS is my favorite for a few reasons. I'll tell you why. One, you don't need a license. There are 6 channels, not so many, but there aren't that many radios that can operate on MRS. You're not going to go to a big box store. You're probably not going to go to your local sporting goods store and find MRS radios. They're out there, but a little harder to find. So in my experience, there's very little traffic on those 6 channels, which is great. That's what we want. We don't want to be competing with a lot of other people when we're trying to communicate with somebody. What's neat about MRS is you are allowed to use an external antenna. On some of these other frequencies, and especially on FRS, you cannot use an external antenna, meaning you cannot attach a nice big tall antenna to your radio and get yourself out there. You're stuck to the rubber ducky that's on top of your HT or handy-talkie. With MRS, we can do that. We can get 20 feet above the structure or 60 feet up, which now again gives us miles of coverage, depending on the terrain. But if you think about a place like Florida, nice and flat, you have an antenna 60 feet above ground, you can throw some serious distance, 10, 20 miles, really depends. But you can only use 2 watts. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. So here are those 5 channels. Okay. I should just make a quick note here. I said it before, but I'll say it again. Radio frequencies are regulated by the Federal Communications Commission. So if you transmit in an unauthorized way, you can be fined and you can be imprisoned. And both are kind of harsh. You can listen to any channel that you can pick up. That doesn't matter. That's not illegal. You cannot transmit. So that's how, if you have a scanner or other things, you can listen in to emergency services or to the Coast Guard. As long as you're not transmitting on their channels, you're good. So just a little note there. You're always safe if you're just listening. There's a couple of little things in the rules here. I just want to blast past them very quickly just so I can say I said it. For FRS, for the family radio service, the walkie-talkie that your kid has, that is restricted to 0.5 watt. The prep store radio goes down to 1 watt. That's pretty close. And I programmed your radios to only transmit at 1 watt when you're using FRS, so you're cool. Don't take the antenna off and put a big antenna on. That's a big no-no. So, I guess maybe I'll start with some of the obvious things. Here's the antenna. The antenna is removable. Very important note, do not ever try to transmit without your antenna attached. You can damage your radio. Okay? You won't be able to receive anything either. But if you need to store this, you can go ahead and take the antenna off. Or if you want to buy an external antenna, one for your vehicle, another one for your home, then you can take this off and use this as your base station. This big knob is pretty obvious what it does. It turns it on and it turns the volume on. Turns the volume up and down. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Here's your clip, which comes in the box. You just have to screw it on. 2 little screws, nice and easy. I do recommend putting the clip on. It is very helpful. The battery is pretty self-explanatory. There's a little button up here on the top. If you push that button down, that's how you can pull the battery on and off. Okay. Probably will never need to do that unless you're getting a replacement battery, where you have multiple batteries. All right, so that's sort of that stuff. Let me go through the buttons on the front. Here's your speaker. And I think your microphone is in there too. Where's the microphone? Yeah, microphone's right here. So you got a little mic here, and then here's your speaker. So all the noise in and out on this area right here. Let's talk about this orange button real quick, the VFO MR. VFO is variable frequency oscillator. Okay, so that's a fancy way for saying you can just input the frequency, and that's that telephone number or radio station number we talked about before. So that'll be like 146.250. I prefer to operate in the MR mode, which is memory recall. And what I put in your radios now are memory stations. So just like the contacts in your cell phone, you create a contact, you put the person's name and the phone number so you don't have to remember it. You just say, oh, okay, I want to call my wife. Ta-da, you just go to your wife's contact and it knows the phone number. We did the same thing here with that. So I programmed in FRS, GMRS, MRS, and the NOAA channels, the emergency weather station channels, all into your radio, and it's all in the memory. So if your radio's on and you just hit that button and you just cycle through it, you'll see it goes between having alpha characters, alphanumeric characters, and just numeric characters. If you wanted to input your own frequency, you would go to the VFO mode where you would see all the little numbers and you could type in whatever frequency you wanted there. If you had another frequency we didn't program in, that's how you do it. Okay? So that's that button. That's pretty easy. You can program the memory channels directly in, but it's very painful to do it on the radio itself. There is a way to do it on the computer, and we'll get into that in a little bit later. This AB button is important. I'm going to go back to memory mode. When the radio turns on, in the way I've set ours up here today, the first top channel is MRS, and the bottom channel is NOAA, NOAA. That's the emergency weather thing. It tells you what's going on around you. I set it to 4 because in the area that we are here, if you're in the Palm Beach area, 4 is probably the strongest signal. I think there's 6 of them or more. You may want to change it to the one that's closest to you, depending on where you live. But for us right now today, 4 is going to pick that up. A and B moves us between these two channels. So your radio can have basically 2 channels active at a time, and you can just switch between them by pressing A and B. So that way you don't always have to constantly put in frequencies. More times than not, you're on 2. Well, let's say one group is on MRS and another group is on GMRS, and you know one group is on MRS 2 and they're GMRS 3. You can put those 2 things in and just switch between A and B to transmit and receive. Okay? And if you have any questions about that later, we can talk about that later. I hope that explains it. So you have basically 2 ready to go. Think of it as your quick call, your shortcut list. But you can change these, and we'll talk about that later. This band button doesn't really help us much if we're in memory mode. So chances are you're never going to use this button. This button is only if we're in the VFO mode, and for some reason we wanted to switch between VHF and UHF. But if you're just going to be putting in the frequency you want anyway, a specific frequency, then you don't need to hit this button. So it's sort of superfluous. But all right, let's get to the good stuff on the side here. The most important button on the radio is this big black one in the middle here. It says PTT on the bottom. It stands for push to talk. Guess what that does when you push on it? Yeah, that's right. That's how you talk. Just a couple of notes about talking on these things. Don't push it. Hold it over here. Don't put it in your mouth like this. You want to be here and just speak in a nice, clear voice. Okay? It's not a cell phone. It's a handy-talkie, so you're going to talk like this if you want to listen to it, and you're going to move back and forth like this. But you know, keep it nice and clear. Remember, the microphone's there. The call button, which is this orange button on the top, this does kind of a neat thing. If you press it once, it gets you to your traditional FM radio. So if you want to listen to jazz or whatever, your hot jams in the morning, you can do that here. So cool during an emergency. If there's emergency broadcast going on and you want to listen what's happening in the greater world, you can pick up FM. Oddly, you can't get AM, such as it is, but you're getting FM at least. The Moni button on the bottom. Okay, this button on the bottom here, it says MONI, Moni, monitor. This button has 2 functions depending on how you press it. If you just press it once, quickly, it turns on the LED light on top of the radio, which, believe it or not, actually can come in very handy. It's a pretty bright little light, and it can get you around in the dark. If you press it again, it just gives you a little blinky, maybe an emergency type of thing. Press it 3rd time, and it turns off. If you press the monitor button and hold it, then it opens the Squelch, which turns the noise filter off and will allow you to hear any weak signals if they exist, and it defeats the noise filter within the radio. Okay, that's what that button does. One, I guess, last point I didn't think of right here. On the other side, you have this little flap here, and there's basically 2 little input areas. One is for a microphone jack, so you can, if you have an aftermarket headphone, microphone type piece, that's what these are for. So one is SP, that's speaker, and the other is for microphone. So just like on the back of your computer, if you have a microphone and speaker jack, that's what these are for. So you could have a third-party earpiece, or well, usually that's what they use it for. Or there's a little, you know, you'll see maybe a police officer, he's got this thing and he's talking to it over here, right? That would plug into that thing on the side. So charging this thing is pretty straightforward. You do need to use the charging base, which comes with the radio. And you just have to be careful that you seat it properly. There's a little bit of wiggle in there, a little bit of slop, but There's some grooves that help you seat it. It'll light up here when you're charging. You can plug it into the wall, and your radio came with a little wall wart that you can plug that in. In your Elite Ready pack, you have two other options for charging the radio. First one is the solar panel. Solar panel has a little USB output. The radio in your Ready pack came with a USB charging cable. So we just plug that sucker in there. Easier said than done. And then take the other end and put it into our base. Now we can use the panel to charge up the radio. I should make a caveat here. You definitely want this thing in direct sunlight, and you want it angled towards the sun. That's how solar works. You just put it outside in the shade somewhere. Not going to cut. This USB cable will kind of work with anything that's USB. So you could probably just plug this into your wall board, or you can use your computer or any other battery that you have. Coincidentally, our Prep Store Lite, also included in the Elite Ready pack, does have a USB output and does happen to have the charging capability. So I can use the light and the battery that's in the light as a backup battery for this. Now I will say the batteries in these things are pretty great. When you're transmitting a lot, you're draining the battery. But if you're receiving, I charge mine once a month, maybe. I mean, they're surprisingly good. They go for quite a while. Okay. So once we turn the radio on and we're in our memory mode and we're looking at MRS 1 as an example, but I want to move to MRS 2. How do I do that? These little buttons, these little up and down arrows on the top of the Prep Store radio. If you press the buttons up, the left button goes up. Oh, look at that. MRS 3, MRS 4, MRS 5, FRS G1. Now that's how I'm moving through all the different memory channels programmed in the radio. If I want to go back down, I use the down arrow key. If I happen to remember that FRS 5 is channel 9, I can just hit 009 and it'll bring me right to that also. You could have 100 channels on here. That's why there's 3 digits you would have to hit 009. Like your television set, if you wanted to get to channel 25, you have to hit 025. That's the same thing on these radios. Chances are you're just going to use these little up and down arrows. That's what I use most of the time. And that's what gets you between channels. Okay? And if you say, well, okay, I want to have 2 groups, and I'm going to be on MRS 1, and I'm going to be on MRS 2, we can do that pretty easy. So I'll program our first station back to MRS 1. I'm going to hit the AB button, and now I'm going to move this station up to MRS 2. And now I can bounce between the two stations and listen.